Chapter 2 The Champion Has Come. They had a sheath for the sword. It had been made days before. King Reginos left to get it, leaving me alone with his daughter. Now that I was here, I did not think to question how I came and why it should have been possible. Neither, it seemed, did she question the fact. I was there. It seemed inevitable. We regarded one another silently until the king returned with the scabbard. "This will protect us against your sword's poison," he said. He held it out to me. For a moment I hesitated before stretching my own hand towards it and accepting it. The king frowned and looked at the ground. Then he folded his arms across his chest. I held the scabbard in my two hands. It was opaque, like old glass, but the metal was unfamiliar to me, or rather to John Dacre. It was light, flexible, and strong. I turned and picked up the sword. The handle was bound in gold thread and was vibrant to my touch. The pommel was a globe of deep red onyx, and the hilt was worked in strips of silver and black onyx. The blade was long and straight and sharp, but it did not shine like steel. Instead, in color, it resembled lead. The sword was beautifully balanced, and I swung it through the air and laughed aloud. It seemed to laugh with me. "Arakose, sheath it!" cried King Reginos in alarm. "Sheath it! The radiation is death to all but yourself!" I was reluctant now to put the sword away. The feel of it awakened a dim remembrance. "Arakose, please, I beg you!" Yolinda's voice echoed her father's. "Sheath the sword!" Reluctantly, I slid the sword into its scabbard. Why was I the only one who could wear the sword without being affected by its radiation? Was it because, in that transition from my own age to this, I had become constitutionally different in some way? Was it that the ancient Arakose and the unborn John Dacre? Or was it vice versa? Had metabolisms which had adapted to protect themselves against the power which flowed from the sword? I shrugged. It did not matter. The fact itself was enough. I was unconcerned. It was as if I was aware that my fate had been taken almost entirely out of my own hands. I had become a tool. If only I had known then to what use the tool would be put, then I might have fought against the pull and remained the harmless intellectual John Dacre. But perhaps I could not have fought and won. The power that drew me to this age was very great. At any rate, I was prepared at the moment to do whatever fate demanded of me. I stood where I had materialized, in the tomb of Arakose, and I reveled in my strength and in my sword. Later, things were to change. "I will need clothes," I said, for I was naked, "and armor, and a steed. I am Arakose." "Clothes have been prepared," said King Reginos. He clapped his hands. "Here." The slaves entered. One carried a robe, another a cloak, another a white cloth which I gathered had to serve for underwear. They wrapped the cloth around my lower quarters and slipped the robe over my head. It was loose and cool and had felt pleasant on my skin. It was deep blue, with complicated designs and stitched into it with gold, silver, and scarlet thread. The cloak was scarlet, with designs of gold, silver, and blue. They gave me soft boots of doeskin to put on my feet, and a wide belt of light brown leather with an iron buckle in which were set rubies and sapphires, and I hung my scabbard on this. Then I gripped the sword with my left fist. "I am ready," I said. Yolinda shuddered. "Then let us leave this gloomy place," she murmured. With one last look back at the days on which the heap of dust still lay, I walked with the king and the princess of Necronal out of my own tomb and into a calm day that, while warm, had a light breeze blowing. We were standing on a small hill. Behind us, the tomb, apparently built of black quartz, looked time-worn and ancient, pitted by the passing of many storms and many winds. On its roof was a corroded statue of a warrior mounted on a great battle charger. The face had been smoothed by dust and rain, but I knew it. It was my face. I looked away. Below us a caravan was waiting. There were the richly caparisoned horses and a guard of men dressed in that same golden armor I had seen in my dreams. These warriors, however, were fresher looking than the others. Their armor was fluted, embellished with raised designs, ornate and beautiful, but, according to my sparse reading on the subject of armor, coupled with Ericos's staring memory, totally unsuitable for war. The fluting and embossing acted as a trap to catch the points of a spear or sword, whereas armor should be made to turn a point. This armor, for all its beauty, acted more as an extra danger than protection. The guards were mounted on heavy war horses, but the beasts that knelt awaiting us resembled a kind of camel from which all the camel's lumpen ugliness had been bred. These beasts were beautiful. On their high backs were cabins of ebony, ivory, and mother of pearl, curtained in scintillating silks. We walked down the hill, and, as we walked, I noticed that I still had on my finger the ring that I had worn as John Dacre, a ring of woven silver that my wife had given me. My wife. I could not recall her face. I felt I should have left the ring behind me, on that other body, but perhaps there is no body left behind. We reached the kneeling beasts, and the guards stiffened their backs to acknowledge our arrival. I saw curiosity in many of the eyes that looked at me. King Reginos gestured towards one of the beasts. "Would you care to take your cabin, champion?" Though he himself had summoned me, he seemed to be slightly wary of me. "Thank you." I climbed the little ladder of plaited silk and entered the cabin. It was completely lined with deep cushions of a variety of hues. The camels climbed to their feet, and we began to move swiftly through a narrow valley whose sides were lined with evergreen trees which I could not name. Something like spreading monkey puzzle trees, but with more branches and broader leaves. I had laid my sword across my knees. I inspected it. It was a plain soldier's sword, having no markings on the blade. The hilt fitted perfectly into my right hand as I gripped it. It was a good sword, but why it was poisonous to others I did not know. Presumably, it was also lethal to those whom King Reginos called the Hounds of Evil, the Eldrin. As we traveled through the soft day, I drowsed on my cushions, feeling strangely weary, until I heard a cry and pushed back the curtains of my cabin to look ahead. There was Necronol, the city which I had seen in my dreams. Far away still, it towered upwards so that the entire mountain upon it which was built was hidden by its wondrous architecture. Minarets, steeples, domes, and battlements shone in the sun, and above them all loomed the huge palace of the warrior kings, a noble structure, many-towered, the palace of 10,000 windows. I remembered the name. I saw King Reginos peer from his own cabin and cry, "Katorn! Ride ahead and tell the people that Ericose the champion has come to drive the evil ones back to the mountains of sorrow." The man he addressed was a sullen-faced individual, doubtless the captain of the Imperial Guard. "Aye, sire," he growled. He drew his horse out of line and galloped speedily along the road of white dust which wound now down on an incline. I could see the road stretching for many miles into the distance towards Necronol. I watched the rider for a while, but wearied of this eventually, and instead strained my eyes to make out details in the great city structure. The cities of London, New York, or Tokyo were probably bigger in area, but not much. Necronol was spread around the base of the mountain for many miles. Surrounding the city was a high wall upon which turrets were mounted at intervals. So at last we came to the great main gates of Necronol, and our caravan halted. A musical instrument sounded, and the gates began to swing open. We passed through into the streets packed with jostling, cheering people who shouted so loudly I was forced at times to cover my ears for fear they would rupture.